hand over your eyes. I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today. And over your ears. I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today. And now over your heart. And just extend out your arms. I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today. The spiritual truth that I'm working with today is that with God, all things are possible. With God, all things are possible. It actually, if we want to be more successful, and most of us in this room are very successful right now, but if you want to be even more successful in your life, bring God in. Bring Allah in. Bring Elohim in. Bring infinite wisdom into our lives. Let's make partners, co-creators with infinite wisdom. Today's spiritual truth comes from, excuse me, today's spiritual truth comes from the Bible. And the full phrase is, with man some things are impossible, but with God all things are possible. With man some things are impossible. We have to go to God. With God all things are possible. See, with God, it's possible to be self-confident when we walk into any room. And when we walk into some rooms and know we're in the wrong room, with God, it's possible to know we need to get out of that room. With God, it's possible for us to have enough money so that some of that money is extra money. With God, it's possible to go to a gym and actually like going to the gym. With God, it's possible to forgive people, even those people we don't think we can forgive. With God, it's possible to define who we are, ourselves, to define how we live, who we love, how we worship. With God, that's possible for ourselves. But you know what? Sometimes it takes courage to define ourselves. Sometimes it takes courage to stand up. Because sometimes, in fact, I think a lot of times, we've given votes to other people as to whether we're okay or not, or whether we're who we want to be or not. We've given other people the vote. And sometimes the majority vote as to how we define ourselves. And sometimes because we've given them the majority vote, we try and cram ourselves into their picture. Whether it's a picture our family's given us, whether it's a picture society has tried to give us, whatever it is, we've tried to cram ourselves into somebody's idea of who we are. Well, today we're going to borrow from our Jewish ancestors in looking at Hanukkah. Now, we're in the second Sunday of a series that we're doing all month long in December. We dedicate December to looking at the festival of light that we are. We are lights ourselves. We started out with Bodhi Day, which is the day of the anniversary of the enlightenment of the Buddha. Today we're going to look at Hanukkah, and then we're going to go next Sunday to winter solstice so that we take a good look at the darkness so that when the light comes, we're ready for it. Christmas Eve, I hope you'll all be here. It's such a beautiful service on Christmas Eve with everybody having candles, and we're going to have special music that day. We'll do the Christian tradition of knowing the light of the Christ consciousness that we are, and then we'll wrap it up with Kwanzaa, which is not a religious holiday, but a cultural holiday that reminds us that we are all lights on the planet. So it's a very special time, but today it's the day for Hanukkah. Now, before I bring our guests up to light and bless the altar, I want to just say this, and I say it every Hanukkah because I think we need to be reminded of it. This is not a replacement holiday. This is not a holiday that Jewish moms and dads thought up because Christian kids were getting presents. Not what it is. It's a holiday all on its own, and it's powerful. And as you'll see today, and some of you have been coming for a while, you'll be reminded that it has a great deal of spiritual nourishment for us regarding our freedom on this planet. But it's not a replacement holiday, and it shouldn't be. It's not the most important holiday on the Jewish calendar either, by any means. But it's a standalone holiday. It's its own. So I'm going to ask Jan Ferris and her daughter Fiona Ferris to come up and bless our altar.
atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asa nisim lavotenu, sayamim hahem hazman hazeh.
We praise you, O Lord, our God, ruler of the world, who has sanctified us by your commandments and commanded us to kindle the Hanukkah lights. We praise you, O Lord, ruler of the world, who has permitted us to be present at this happy time.
As one candle may kindle many others and yet lose none of its own light, so Judaism has kindled the light of truth for many ages and still shines in many lands and still shines through the ages. It's a sticker.
The eighth day is the light of courage. Let truth and justice be your armor and fear not. Judah Maccabee, the hero of Hanukkah, lived by the words Moses spoke to Joshua. Be strong and of good courage.
Happy Hanukkah.
Thank you. Beautiful. Now, as always, when we celebrate Jewish holidays, we show respect to that culture by doing what they do, which is to tell the story. Every year we tell the story. So I'm going to ask those of you who've been coming here to resist the temptation to think that you know everything about the story. The story will not change. It will be the same story. You will have heard it last year. But the you is different. The difference is who you are. You're going to hear it because you're in a different place in your life. In fact, with the 9 o'clock man, at 9 o'clock, one of the men from the congregation came up and he said, you know, I hear this sermon every year. I hear the story every year. And this is the year I got so-and-so. I won't tell you what he got out of it, but he got something out of it. There's a blessing for each one of you here today in this story. But you have to hear it with a beginner's mind. You have to see it with a beginner's heart in your mind. There's a Jewish proverb that says, God so loved stories that he invented people. And that's kind of how this is. So you know in your life that in order for your life to go from good to great, something has to happen. Something has to happen for your life to go from good to great. See, we were not meant to be stuck in our lives. For your marriage to go from good to great, from your relationship with your kids to go from good to great, from your work life to go from good to great, something's got to happen. Now, the truth is, the spiritual teaching is that nothing actually has to happen externally. It has to happen internally. But for most of us, myself included, in order for me to shift, very often something has to happen out here to kind of light my fire, to kind of give me the little nudge in life to move along. And the Jews during this time were okay, but they were slaves. They were slaves under a very nice leader named King Alexander the Great. King Alexander the Great did not hassle anybody. He just let them live their lives as they wanted to live. He let them pray how they wanted to live, speak the language they wanted to live, eat the foods they wanted to live, dress how they wanted to dress. He just let them be. He wasn't going to hassle them at all. But keep in mind that they were dependent on a benevolent ruler. And that's important for us to know in the story. Because sometimes we think everything is okay in our life, but we're not really free. We're dependent on somebody else not being upset in our lives. See, our lives are not terrible in our marriages, so we know in order for it to go to a good marriage, to a great marriage, something has to shift. Something has to be said, something has to be embraced, something has to change in order for our marriage to go from good to great. But we don't want to rock the boat and make it worse, so we don't say anything. That's what they were doing. We're living under a benevolent institution in our marriage, a benevolent situation in our marriage. The same thing is true with our kids. Maybe your kids, we need to tell them something, to move them in a different direction. But we don't want to make, it's okay at home right now. There's no warring going on at home right now. So we don't really want to say anything and rock the boat, but we're giving them the power over us. We're living in a benevolent situation. That's true with our bosses sometimes, because we don't want to speak up. So we just remain silent. Well, here is the thing. For you to go from good to great, we are never meant to be stuck. We're never meant to be stuck. So something has to happen. Your soul will call something forward in you for you to change in your life. See, perhaps what needs to happen is you need to speak up or you need to run away. The situation is no longer tolerable. So you need to either speak up or run away. If you run away, you're simply going to bring it with you. Everywhere you go, there you are. So you're going to have the same situation that you have right now that's making you stuck, only it'll be in a different meat suit. It'll be the same boss. It'll be the same coworker. Be the same boyfriend or girlfriend. They'll just look different to you. But your soul will call that situation back, because in order for you to move on, something has to happen in order for you to move on. Well, the same thing happened with in the souls, the common souls of the Jews drew to them the death of great King Alexander, the benevolent king, the guy that liked him. They drew into him Antiochus, the mean king, a king that did not like them, a king who was afraid of him, an anti-Semite. He was fearful of them. He was fearful of the way they dressed. He was fearful of the way they spoke. He was fearful of the way they worshiped. Now, before any of us get too judgmental here, we want to know that we are all of the parts of this story. Every single one of us is Alexander the Great. We allow people to have their way, and we just allow it. We don't try and limit it. Those of us who are white have white privilege, and with white privilege, we allow things to go on because we can. Those of us who are heterosexual, we allow things to go on because we can. Those of us who are not Muslim, we allow things to go on because we can. Until it becomes uncomfortable for us. And then we exercise that privilege. You know, sometimes we finally get invited to a party, and we really want to be at this party. And somebody says a racist joke or a homophobic joke. But we really want to be at this party. We know it's not right. But we exercise our privilege and we're quiet. We don't say anything. See, all of us can be benevolent at times, but what we want to remind ourselves is that even though we're acting as Alexander the Great and we're not speaking out, sometimes we can be just as harmful as people like Antiochus is. We're also Antiochus. You know, all of us here want to judge and limit somebody sometime out of fear or dislike. You know, the truth of the matter is, if it were left to me, there would be no more housewives of whatever, Miami, Los Angeles, anywhere. They just wouldn't be on the television show. I would limit them. I would exercise my power if I had it and said, no, young girls shouldn't be seeing this. I'm sorry, you can't be on TV. I'm Antiochus at that point. That's not for me to do. And we all do that at some point in our lives. Whether it's TV evangelists, some people don't like TV evangelists. Some people don't like rich people. Some people don't like people who wear turbans. You know, and the problem with that is, the problem with being Antiochus and trying to limit somebody's behavior is that we miss the blessings that people have in our lives of who they are. And that's the danger of limiting immigrants, because immigrants bring fresh ideas and new ways of looking at things to continents. And when we limit them, we limit that. You know, years ago, when I first got into recovery, I was in Sonoma County, and I went to a meeting every week, and every week there was a couple. And at that time in Sonoma County in recovery, it wasn't uncommon for people to give themselves nicknames. You know, this woman called herself Chrysler Sal, and her husband called himself Saddleback Charlie. And I would go to the meeting, and I had nothing in common with these people, not one thing in common. You know, she had big hair, and she chewed gum in a loud way that always irked me, and just her name, Chrysler Sal, I thought, what kind of name is that? And he always used phrases from country western songs in his talks when he spoke, and I said, oh, that's so ridiculous. I just wanted to limit them. You know what? Had nothing in common with them, except, of course, the reason we were all there. That was the big thing I had in common with them. And to tell the truth, except that I had nothing else in common with them, they saved my life. They saved my life. I could have missed the blessing that they were in my life because I didn't like how they dressed or how they spoke. We all do it. We can think Antiochus and other people are foolish, but the truth is we have to look deep enough until we find those places where we separate ourselves out from others in our life. Well, Antiochus dealt with his fear by forbidding the Sabbath. Forbidding the Sabbath, he sent his soldiers into the beautiful temple that they had built, and they threw pig's blood on the altars, and they did all manner of terrible things. And here's the thing. We can throw all the temper tantrums we want, you and I, and if it's a good idea in the mind of God, it will not work. It will not work. If it worked, there would be no Black Lives Matter movement today. If it worked, gay people would still be having commitment ceremonies instead of weddings like everybody else has. If it worked, transgender people would still be living as imposters. If it worked, I'd still be in the convent. If it worked, Jews would be singing Greek songs right now. But if it's a good idea in the mind of God, eventually it will come forward. Tantrums don't work. If we are willing to say, with God, all things are possible. God is always stronger than any fear-based limitation. Let me say that again, because if we don't take anything else, take that away. God is always stronger than any fear-based limitation. With God, all things are possible. Even standing up to scary people and saying, this is who I am. I am here on purpose, and I am here on God's purpose. See, the Jews, the Antiochus brought his men, and he made the people in the villages bow down to Roman gods. And most of them did. Most of them did. And here again, before we get too judgmental, before we say, well, what was wrong with those guys? Why didn't they stand up? I would have stood up in my life. We have to ask ourselves, where have we passed as somebody we're not in order to be less uncomfortable, to be more comfortable? Some of us didn't maybe go to college, but we're letting people think we did go to college. We're passing because we don't want to be uncomfortable in our lives. Maybe some of us popped our kids, but we don't want anybody to think we ever popped our kids, so we say, no, we never did that. We're passing. we're bowing down, we're passing, being something that we don't want. Maybe we say we hate hip hop, but we love hip hop because we're passing. We're trying to be something that we're not. See, the problem is maybe sometimes we say we have our money trip together when we actually don't. Our money trip is a mess, a total mess, but we're trying to put on that we do. We're doing the same thing that the soldiers did who bowed down. We're kind of trying to make ourselves okay, safe in the world. It's the wrong prayer. I understand the prayer. Before we get too judgmental about those people, we have to understand that the moment anybody stands up to somebody else and says, no, you have the wrong idea about who I am, this is who I am, we have to understand that can only come from us. It can't come from anybody else. And it can only come when we're ready to stand up. And we don't need to judge anybody else for not being able to stand up and be who they are. It can only come in their time, not in anybody else's desired time. But passing is the wrong prayer. The prayer isn't, God, I hope nobody really sees me. The prayer is, I hope, beyond hope, that I have the courage to stand up and say who I am, that I am the hands and the feet and the heart of God. That's who I am. The hands and the feet and the heart of God, in whom God is well pleased. Well, one villager did pray that prayer. He stood up and he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to bow down to your way. I'm going to be who I am. And when he did, he said, whomever is for God's, the way we'd say it is this, whomever is for spiritual principle, follow me. Whomever is for freedom, because that's another name for God, follow me. And 5 people did. 5 people did. They all happened to be his sons. 5 of his sons walked out with him. When he said, no, I'm not going to do that, can't you just hear the crowd going, what are you, nuts? Just bow down. Just save yourself. Just be safe. Don't do that. But he couldn't do it. He said, no, I actually can't do that. Why did he do that? Because he thought beyond what common sense would allow. Common sense says, save yourself. Don't be doing that. You and I have to really get this. We have to think beyond what common sense would allow in every area of our life that we want to change, that we want more freedom in. If we want our marriages to go from good to great, we have to think beyond what common sense will allow. Not what I think he'll do or she'll do or what we can do together. You have to think beyond what common sense will allow. If you want your kids to flourish, you have to think beyond what common sense will allow. If you have somebody who has a diagnosis and it's really concerning you, time is not to worry in on the concern. It's to think beyond what common sense will allow. Because with God, all things are possible, but we have to do the work of thinking beyond what common sense will allow. We can elect a president of this country without negative talk about a whole culture or a whole group of people in a religion. We can do that. But we have to think beyond what common sense will allow in order to do that right now. You know, when we first bought this church, we had enough money. Most of you know this story. We had enough money to buy, we didn't. We had enough money to go to a bank and say, we have this much money, will you lend us the rest, and buy this church. And they did. And they only lent us as much money as we needed to buy the church. We had to build this all out. We had to buy chairs. We had to buy tables. We had to put carpet on the ground. We had to put electricity in. We had to put sound in. We had to go out and borrow $490,000 from people in this congregation in order to do that. That was the bill, $490,000. I had to go out and ask folks, will you lend us this money, some of this money? No collateral. Can I give you any collateral? No, I can't, because the bank has all of that. So you have to give me $490,000 in a loan, just me asking you to do that. Could you do that? Together, we were able to think beyond what common sense would allow. And we were able to raise $490,000. Now, here's the thing. Yeah, that deserved a clap. Here's the thing. There was a woman in the congregation who was livid that I would go and ask people. Now, I wasn't asking millionaires. I was asking teachers. I was asking people who worked for the state. I was asking for people who worked across the street at the Rural California Health Association. I was asking regular people, just regular folks. Could you put up 10? Could you put up 15,000? Could you put up 3,000? Whatever you could put up, I would be grateful for. It wasn't a lot of money. I wasn't asking any millionaires. Everybody sacrificed. Everybody believed in the outcome of this church. Hallelujah. There was a woman who didn't like it. She was furious. She would go around. She'd tell everybody. I only hoped I could get to him before she did. She told everybody, oh, she's crazy. She's going to lose your money. Don't give her any money. Don't give her any money, because the only way she can pay you back is if she wins the lottery. Well, now she said it enough times to enough people, and it created enough angst in the church that I started to buy it. I thought, what am I thinking? $490,000, how are we going to pay this back? But fortunately, I had a meditation practice. I had a way of connecting with God. And as Dr. Michael says, you make the connection, the correction will take care of yourself. And so I just went ahead and we just raised the money. Now I'm happy to say most of you know the only thing we owe right now today out of the $490,000 is $16,000, all of which we have pledged for. We did that by thinking beyond what common sense would allow. We've got to keep doing that in our lives. Well, what happened is the 5 sons and the dad got together and they built a little tiny army. But here's what happens. When you build a little tiny army and you feel that you're in spiritual principle, you become successful. And when you become successful, other people want to join you. You're like a magnet. And other people started to join him in his life. And they got a band of rebels together. Now, I say this every time we do Hanukkah. Getting into a band of rebels is very important. Every one of us in this room needs to be in a band of rebels. This church is a band of rebels. You need to find, maybe on social media, you get in a band of rebels. You know, come to Vivian's workshop. Get rich. That's a band of rebels. Whatever it is that you need to do to get into any group of people that will support you in thinking beyond what's common thought is going to make you successful, and it eventually made them very successful. So successful, in fact, because here's what they did. They'd run out at night and they'd hammer Antioch's people back. And that's important. They're called the Maccabees. Maccabee means hammer. Okay? And so when they hammered them back, what they did was they just kept doing it. They were little, but they kept going out and hammer. The take home for me in that is this. If you think you're going to change a feeling of not enoughism in your life, because everything starts with I'm not enough. That's where it starts from. I'm not enough. I don't have enough. I'm not going to be enough. I won't do enough. If you think any of your not enoughism will happen in the twinkling of an eye, probably won't. You need to hammer at it. If you think that changing a belief about yourself will happen by reading one affirmation card one time, you're wrong. You're wrong. You need to hammer at those affirmations. Keep them up. Do it as many times as necessary until you feel a different shift in your life? Well, Antiochus, he was sick of it. He was sick of it, being hammered all the time, losing here and there. And so he decided to call his whole entire army. Now, in those days, they would announce the date of a battle. I don't quite understand why they did that, but they would post it. We're going to have the battle on this day. And so they posted it, and of course, the Maccabees were ready for him. And so Antiochus gets up in the morning of the battle, and they start putting on their armor. And that's what you and I do. On a day when we have to go see the boss, we put on our armor. On a day we're going to have a tough conversation with our spouse, we put on the armor. On a day when we're going to go do something we're not sure about, we put on our armor. See, we sharpen up our defensiveness. We get our blamer going. We do all that. We put on our armor, and then we go out. And when we do that, we have the same result that Antiochus had, which is to lose. We need to go into situations with God. With God, all things are possible. We need to say an invocation before we go in, not get our blamer and our defensiveness all lined up. We need to go in vulnerable when we go into situations that are scary and painful for us. That's how we win. And in fact, they did win. Now, all of what I've told you so far is really not the story of Hanukkah. The story of Hanukkah comes right now. And that's the story of the ending. So they go back, they win, they go back into this temple that has been desecrated. And the first thing they do that is a big teaching for us is they weep. They sit down and they weep. They see what's happened and they weep. And we need to take a page from this story. When something happens in our life that's painful, we need to weep. And I'm not talking about false weeping. False weeping is when we drink too much, we eat too much, we buy too much, we look at too much internet. That's false weeping. We need to really weep. We need to look at what is the problem and sit down and grieve it. And when we're grieving, when our grieving is complete, I don't mean for months, I mean until we can get up. And they got up and they cleaned everything out, and it came time to light the candle. And the miracle of Hanukkah is this. They had a candle that was supposed to last forever, but they didn't have enough. It was an everlasting light. But they didn't have enough oil. And they did the thing that you and I don't often do. They had what they had, and they took it and they lit the candle with what they had. They saw the end of the vision, which is to have an everlasting light. But they didn't know how they were going to get it there. And as our speaker said last week, stop worrying about how we're going to do something at the end. Just begin. Just begin. And that's what the Jews did. They just lit the candle. You and I all have projects, we have goals, we have dreams. And we don't start because we don't know how the hell we're going to get to the end of it. Or even the middle of it. Don't worry about it. Light the candle and just begin. Let's take this message into prayer. Knowing that there's only one power. It's the power of love that flows through us all of the time. The power of God, because with God all things are possible. We don't discount man, because with man some things are possible, but with God all things are possible. I give thanks for that. I give thanks for that. I give thanks for every single person in this church for coming out on this blustery day to celebrate this beautiful holiday. I give thanks for Jan and Fiona for coming forward. I give thanks. I give thanks for Brian and the band for their beautiful music. I give thanks for our ushers, for the people who arrange the cookies on the trays. I just give thanks. I release this word into the lawn. Together we say, and so it is.